All right, welcome back. So if you did that exercise like I asked, then you probably have a bigger idea of what is going on in terms of your mindset and what is really causing these blocks in getting that beautiful natural birth experience versus how your cultural upbringing and what you've learned about the medical system and what you've learned about natural birth over the years, how that's really impacted you in being able to ask for what you want or to choose what you're really wanting in your birth or to communicate that to your partner or your family, your friends, whatever it is. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the impacts that this lie about our bodies and about the medical system being the saviors and about our birth culture perpetuating that, what that really means. So here's one of the impacts of this lie is you still think that you need something outside of yourself to birth. The truth is that your body is going to do it with or without anybody's permission. If you were stuck in the middle of nowhere and you couldn't get to a hospital and nobody could get to you, you would birth your baby. In fact, one of my friends who also teaches your badass natural birth floor cruise, she even says, it's like, if you go and lock a mom who is going into labor in a closet for 3 days and you open that closet, she's going to be starving and pissed off at you, but she's going to have her baby in her arms and she's going to be breastfeeding. Whereas if you lock somebody in the closet who has an appendicitis, they're dead. So birth is a physiological process, not a medical one, and you don't actually need anything outside of yourself to do it. Your body's going to do it with or without your permission, with or without you doing any yoga exercises, with or without you eating certain foods, with or without you going to the doctor. It's going to happen. Your body's on a timeline. It's going to do it. So what does this really look like though? Okay. So the impact of the lie, of course, is you thinking that you need something outside of yourself to birth. So the thing is that your body will signal you when it's time to push and it will do it, like reverse vomiting. Contraction timing and intensity varies. So it's the peak of that contraction to pay attention to and what you do to move through it. As that peak rises and you get that really sharp edge to it, that is your cervix opening, but it's not always the cervix opening. Sometimes it's just pressure. Sometimes the contraction is just shifting your baby into a different position. Sometimes it's just a practice contraction to warm up your uterus. So there's different types of contractions. You don't just time them. You want to pay attention to what is happening during that contraction. You also want to avoid interruptions and interference because you want to keep the hormones high and stay in tune with your body. You're going to be flooded with endorphins and oxytocin, and you want to keep those going. You don't want to be introducing adrenaline and cortisol because that isn't supposed to come in until the very end when you hit transition. This is why they say transition is the hardest part, because it actually wakes you up from that trance. But until that moment, you need to be in your trance. One of my clients called this psychedelic labor land. So your own responses to the sensations are going to inform your body how to interpret pain. If you automatically tense up and think that the contraction is going to be painful, it's going to be painful. If you approach it as a wave and you get curious about it and you move through it, and you recognize that you need to make certain sounds as you're doing it, or you need to make a certain movement, follow that. And yes, sometimes those sounds are going to sound like you're having sex, because this is, again, a physiological process, is very much tied to your sex organs and to the same sex hormones that run through your body during orgasm. And there's actually a course on orgasm that I actually went and checked out not too long ago. It's called Oh My God, Yes. And this course also talks about how orgasm has a certain peak. So there's a plateau period. So this is the same thing with labor. So there's still the rising and getting up higher, and then there's a plateau, and then you fall down. And this is the same kind of contraction wave as you would have with multiple orgasms. So this all ties together. So babies are born accidentally without a doctor or midwife, even high risk pregnancies, twins, breech, and VBAC. The physiological process, as I said, you have to ride the waves and stay open. You don't want to tense up and fight it. And when birth isn't messed with, it usually works. There's only like maybe 10 to 15% of the population that needs medical intervention. And usually that's because there's like a congenital anomaly or there's a problem, like a complication where you do need a little bit of medical help. But the true natural birth experience does not require any medical intervention. And as I said, it can be relatively painless. You can think you're not that far into labor based on arbitrary signs that don't actually mean anything, like dilation. And, you just have to recognize that labor and birth is in all different shapes and sizes. And you'll really recognize that when you read Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage or Ina May's Guide to Childbirth, where she shares a lot of birth stories. My clients have all had different types of labors, even though they had the same risk factors, even though they were going for the same basic experience, even though a lot of them were VBACs. The fact is, like, labor is just so different, and it's going to be different even if you've already had one baby before. My 2 births with my son and my daughter were both incredibly different experiences. So how do you work with this in the context of our birth culture and medical system? What do you need to do to really embody this and recognize this? You need to toss out the due date and stop watching the pod, which means you need to stop looking for labor signs. You need to stop looking for ways that's like, am I dilated? No, we don't pay attention to that. We don't pay attention to how close or how far apart contractions are. We tune into our body and we recognize that contractions will not be progressing until after the baby arrives. Until then, as long as you can ignore it, do nothing, then just keep ignoring it. Focus on other things because the contractions will either get more intense or they'll fizzle out. Sometimes it's just practice. This is how you keep your sanity during a prodromal labor, which is the stop and start labor that a lot of people, they keep going back to the hospital. It's like, you're not in labor, and they get frustrated and they think, well, maybe I have to induce. Maybe I don't go into labor on my own. When the truth is that your body is just warming up. I had a stop and start labor for 4 weeks. I know how frustrating it is. And I can tell you from experience that the best way to get through that is to recognize, like, until my waters break and baby is crowning, birth not happening. That's how you manage to keep your sanity. You don't call the midwife too soon. You don't go to the hospital too soon. And remember, rest. Okay? Keep the room dark and quiet and tune inward. Because if you actually are in labor, that will actually speed up your labor. Whereas if you're trying to do all of the things that they tell you to do to get things moving, it's going to slow down your labor and it's going to actually drive you crazier because you're thinking, oh, things are really picking up and it's intense. But then you get to the hospital and find out you're only 4 centimeters and you're like, well, what the hell? And you wonder if it's maybe I just had this really long labor and baby didn't come out. When the truth is that your body is actually signaling, hey, it's time to get to our cave. Are you out in the forest right now? Is there a tiger in the area? Because your heart rate just raised up and like you're kind of climbing stairs and you're doing all of the things. So baby's coming. You need to go and rest so that we have the ability to do this. And you ignore it because you're like, oh, contractions are happening. I need to do more of all of the things. And your body is like, hello, I'm going to give you a stronger signal now because you aren't listening to the first one. So I'm now going to make it even more intense. Baby's not here yet. We're not ready yet, but I'm going to signal you to get to your cave and you think, oh, it's labor time. You get to the hospital and like, you're not progressing. And you know what happens. Okay. So, what you need to do when you start to really notice that they are picking up, and you can even practice this if it's the middle of the day and you're like, I'm not tired, but I'm not going to do all of the things either. What you can do is you can breathe, you can practice breathing. So, you take a deep breath. You take those deep yoga breaths, those deep, deep belly breaths. And maybe there's some that you're going to have your own rhythm. I don't want to teach too many breathing techniques because I find that when you do that, you're trying to do other people's breathing techniques instead of following your own rhythm. And then if it doesn't work for you, you think, hey, my body's broken. I can't seem to do this. I can't get into this rhythm. So find a rhythm that actually works for you when it comes to breathing and when it comes to relaxation. Start paying attention and play around with it. Maybe it's a deep breath, holding it, and then letting out. Maybe it's just a slower breath. Or maybe it's whatever it is. Just play around with it. Find the one that works for you and recognize that what happened in early labor might be different from what happens in more active level of labor as you get into your meditative state. Because again, when you get into a meditative state, your body takes over and your mind is gone. And that's what we want. The other one is you want to moan. So deep, deep guttural sounds like that, like pushing the energy down. And you move with the sensations. So whatever you need to do, if you need to move your hips, if you need to just crouch down, one thing that I did after I got out of the pool, like I'd get out of the pool, I'd go to the bathroom, I'd come back, and before I'd get back in the pool, I would lean, like I would grab the countertop. We had an island countertop. And then during the peak of the contraction, I would actually squat down while holding onto that island countertop. And then I would move through it and I would sway my hips. And when the contraction finished, I'd get up and I'd go back into the pool. So again, you want to follow the pattern of your body, not what you think needs to happen.